Hey, what's up, everybody? Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of our very own fee-only certified financial planners. Please note this podcast is intended for educational purposes and should not be considered financial or investment advice, as we do not know all the variables to one's personal situation when answering a question. Before we jump into today's question, a shout out to our extraordinary YFP financial planning team that makes this segment possible. Your Financial Pharmacist offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. So whether you want to pay off your student loans, make the right investment decisions, or simply build a solid financial plan, we'll help get your income working for you rather than the other way around. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Sally in the YFP Facebook group. Sally asks, how do you handle debt repayment versus emergency fund versus retirement savings? We are finally at a point where all of our debt has less than a 4% interest rate, but we have a combined $150,000 in student loan debt, as well as a little left on a car loan that should be paid off by the end of the year. We originally saved up $5,000 in emergency fund, about 1 month's expenses, and did the employer match on our 401k. Our original plan was basically a modified version of Dave Ramsey, and all of our efforts was for debt repayment after we saved up for the initial $5,000. But now we are considering splitting the effort until we grow the emergency fund to 3 months of expenses. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so everyone can say with me, right? It depends. This is the proverbial, hey, should we pay down debt? Should we save? Should we invest for the long term? And it really does depend. You know, the first question I would ask Sally are like, what are your goals? If you are a follower of Dave Ramsey, you might look at that debt and be like, geez, this needs to be gone post haste. But you could also, if I ask you a question like, how do you feel about your investments? How do you feel about retirement? And if in talking to many pharmacists and asking that question of how you feel, some of the feelings I hear is like, I feel like I'm way behind Tim, or I feel like I'm just confused.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to prioritize. I think another piece of this, Tim, is like, how old are you? If you are in the beginning stages of your career, time is a beautiful thing for a financial plan. And that's one of the reasons that I like to work with young professionals. I also like to work with retirees, but young professionals, if you steer that frigate, way away from the iceberg, you can do some great things versus, if you're in your late 40s, 50s, and, the time horizon to retirement is a lot less, like maybe that plays a part here. And, that other thing is like, when you want to retire. So, we're seeing less of the proverbial, hey, I want to retire at 65. It's, maybe I want to retire at 50 or sooner. There's a lot of people that are, so that plays a part. And then what you currently have, if you have 6 figures worth of retirement savings already, that's going to play a part in this. So I think, again, not advice. We can't give investment, or we can't give any type of financial planning advice, because obviously, Sally, you're not a client. But, I would say I like the phase approach, right? So sometimes, one of the reasons I think Dave Ramsey and his steps are so popular is because it's something to point to and say, hey, I can do that, or I can work towards that.
Yep.
The problem is that everybody's so nuanced, right? So it's going to depend. So I like the fact that you have $5,000 in expenses. Again, I would push for non-discretionary monthly expenses, which is what the textbook says. So these are expenses that are going to go out the door regardless if you work or not. So these are things like a rent or a mortgage payment, your student loan payment, groceries, the Netflix bill, maybe the travel budget, maybe some of the other things that we can potentially turn off. That gives you a little bit more flex in terms of what you need to have sitting in cash there. So I like the fact that you have that seated with 5. But again, if you and your partner dual income, you really are, really should be looking to that 3 months worth of expenses. So I like the idea of splitting the effort. I think for me, if I see like, hey, we have a little bit of car debt, my thing is like, maybe just blast through that and get through that as quickly as possible. I know you want to get it done by year end, but maybe just be hyper focused, or I think he says gazelle like, to get that just off the books and go from there. The fact that everything is below 4% is really good. Again, there's nothing on fire. There's no bleeding head wound to say that you have a 18% credit card debt. So a lot of it goes back to lining up your next step with what are your goals, and what are you really trying to accomplish in the next year or two. So I don't want to say that there's a wrong answer here. Again, you're asking the right questions. The answer, though, to your question is really it depends, and a lot of it is dependent on going down, a deeper conversation of, what is a wealthy life for you, and what does that mean today, but what does that mean, in 30 years from now? And I think those are some of the exercises, like again, that we do with clients.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Tim, Sally brought this question forward because it probably has to go up there as the most common question we get in some variation, And what I'm referring to is, hey, Tim, I'm thinking about A, B, or C. What should I do? And right after I say it depends, I say, what's the goal? What's the vision? What's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And not that I expect we're going to answer that in a short conversation, but trying to really drive home the point of taking a step back to say, where do we want to go? How does this line up with the long term vision of the financial plan? And I think this fits really nicely into one of the things that we do with our clients, the planning team does, is early on in the planning process, we do a session on script your plan. And the entire purpose of that is to really identify, before we make tactical decision on A, B, or C, where are we trying to go and how do we develop a framework in which we then make those financial decisions into the future. So tell us a little bit more about, like, when you do script your plan with a client, what is that process all about and why is it so important?
Yeah, so it's really an exercise, kind of in a version of like life planning.
Mm-hmm.
And, life planning is really, they call it's financial planning done right. And sometimes I get annoyed, is maybe a strong word, but I get frustrated by the pharmacist that was sold a whole life policy in their P4 year with, no kids, no dependents. And it just is not a fit. It doesn't make sense in any form or fashion to sell that product. And the problem is that the professional that's selling it, it's not like they're sitting down and asking like, okay, what are your goals? Things like that. So I say like this step is almost like trying to, we talk about the get organized meeting, which precedes the script or plan meeting, is like, where the heck are we?
Mm-hmm.
And, Sally kind of paints a pretty good picture, but we kind of do line by line. These are the different accounts that you have. These are the debts that you have, et cetera. And then the script or plan is like, okay, now that we know where you're at, we have a snapshot of that. Where the heck do we want to go?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really meant to ask those thought provoking questions of what is a wealthy life for you. And if you're listening to this, like, when's the last time you asked yourself that?
Yeah.
Hardly ever, right? Because we're super busy. We're busy professionals. We're running in 18 million directions. But what an important question to ask yourself, and are you on the path that you want to be on, or do you feel suffocated because of A, B, or C, and what can you do to kind of write that path? So the life planning it's kind of put first things first, and I went through it when I was going through the training, and like I say, like, I still remember when I was life planned, like I still remember what that felt like. And to me, it's really an integral part of what we do. And I think it's really kind of taken the, hey, this is where I really want to go, and then applying that to a plan in a way that makes sense. And sometimes having that objective third party to
Mm-hmm.
look at that is just so important. But I will say too, Tim, is like, one of the things I say over and over is it depends.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like once we get those foundational, hey, where are we at? Where do we want to go? To me, I think our function is not to hedge. Like, as a planner, like,
That's right.
I found myself saying like, hey, if this were me, or knowing what I know about you and your goals and what your balance sheet looks like, do this. But it's also offering alternatives. But at the end of the day, what you're paying for when you're a client is advice. And sometimes I hear, from clients that come from other firms, it's like the planner like hedged. They're like, well, you could do this or you could do that. But like, if I'm paying a professional, whether it's an attorney, an accountant, or whatever, like, I want them to say, hey, shoot me straight, Jack. Like, what do you think I should do,
Yes.
knowing what my goals are? And I think that's super important too.
Great stuff. And for those that are interested in learning more about the financial planning process, what we offer at YFP, head on over to yfpplanning.com. You can schedule a free discovery call from there. So, Sally, thank you so much for taking time to submit your question. And as a small thank you, we're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. And to those that are listening, if you have a question, or those that are active in the YFP Facebook group, we'd love to hear from you. You can submit your question by going to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP, or you can send us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Have a great rest of your week.